After what felt like an eternity of flying through the clouds, I finally stepped into my home, greeted by the familiar scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. The soothing sounds of the city outside faded away as I closed the door behind me, my body still slightly swaying from the residual motion of the plane. I had just completed a long-haul flight, and all I wanted was to sink into the comfort of my couch and unwind with my wife, Sophie. But something was off. The living room was dimly lit, and I noticed that the television was on, casting flickering shadows across the room. Sophie usually greeted me with an embrace, her warmth wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. Today, however, I was met with silence. I dropped my suitcase by the door and called out, "Sophie? I'm home." No response. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach as I walked down the hallway. I passed our bedroom, and the door was slightly ajar. Peering inside, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. Her brow furrowed in concentration. I opened the door wider and stepped in, the floor creaking beneath me. "Hey, love, you all right?" I asked, attempting to sound casual, though my heart raced with a strange anxiety. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't heard me approach. "Oh, Kevin, you're home early." Her voice was a little too high, a little too forced, and I immediately sensed the tension in the air. "Yeah, flight got in ahead of schedule. Everything okay?" Sophie's gaze darted back to her phone, and I caught a glimpse of the screen before she quickly turned it away. My stomach sank further. The screen displayed a message thread with a name I had dreaded seeing, Trevor. Trevor, her ex-boyfriend. A flood of memories rushed back. The late-night conversations, the jealousy I felt when she mentioned him, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about their past. I had trusted her and believed her assurances that it was all behind her. But now, seeing that name lit a fire of suspicion within me. "Just catching up on some messages," she said, her tone light, but I could hear the underlying tension. I narrowed my eyes, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own home. "With Trevor?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "It's nothing, Kevin. Just old friends checking in." Old friends. Those two words hung heavily in the air, thickening the atmosphere between us. I needed to know the truth. The doubt clawed at me, and my heart raced as I contemplated my next move. "I'm going to grab a drink," I said, turning away, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed a moment to think, to breathe. I stepped into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, but the cool liquid did little to quench the heat of anxiety pooling inside me. As I leaned against the counter, my mind raced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to confront her. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the bedroom. "Sophie, I need you to be honest with me. Is there something going on between you and Trevor?" The look on her face was a mixture of surprise and irritation, but she hesitated too long before answering. "No, of course not, Kevin. You know I love you." The words were reassuring, yet the way she clutched her phone tightly in her hand spoke volumes. I was losing my grip on the situation. I needed proof. "Can I see your phone?" I asked, my voice steady, though inside I felt like I was about to shatter. Sophie hesitated, her eyes widening slightly, and my heart sank further. "Why do you need to see my phone?" "That's not fair." "Because I need to know," I replied, the urgency in my tone creeping into every syllable. I stepped forward, determination flooding through me. "You can show me, or I'll just check it myself." Finally, she relented, tossing the phone onto the bed as if it burned her hands. "Fine, just look, but you'll see it's nothing." With trembling fingers, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. My heart pounded in my ears as I navigated to the messages. My worst fears materialized as I scrolled through the conversation. The affectionate emojis, the inside jokes, the lingering sentiments. All signs of something more than just a friendship. My gut twisted violently, and I felt my breath hitch. I glanced back at Sophie, whose face had turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words were lost in the haze of betrayal that enveloped me. In that moment, everything changed. The trust we had built over the years began to crumble, and the realization that Sophie had been hiding something so significant shattered my heart. I stood there, feeling as though the ground had been pulled out from under me, unsure of what to say next. The air in the house felt suffocating after the confrontation, thick with unspoken words and heavy with betrayal. I couldn't shake the images from the messages in Sophie's phone, words of affection that cut deeper than any knife. My mind raced as I paced around the house, trying to make sense of it all. I needed answers, and I wouldn't rest until I found them. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories of our life together. The laughter we shared, and the dreams we built, were all tainted by this new reality. The thought of Sophie with Trevor twisted in my gut like a poisoned dagger. I couldn't trust her anymore. In the early hours of the morning, when the world outside was still shrouded in darkness, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I needed to gather evidence, real, tangible proof that my suspicions were correct. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for anything I could find about Trevor. It wasn't hard, the internet was a treasure trove of information. I found his social media profiles, scrolling through his posts and pictures. They were mostly benign. Photos of him at the gym, hiking trips with friends, and the occasional party. But something was unsettling about the way he smiled. The confidence in his eyes. It made my blood boil. Next, I turned my attention to Sophie. I remembered her phone's password. It was the name of our favorite dog from when we were kids. I'd never thought I'd need it for something like this. After a few seconds of deliberation, I opened her phone again, my heart racing. I felt like a detective in a thriller, inching closer to the truth with every click. The messages from Trevor were still there, waiting for me like a damning confession. I scrolled through the entire thread, and what I found was more than I had bargained for. The conversations dated back several months, revealing a clandestine relationship that had been brewing right under my nose. There were late-night exchanges filled with longing, plans to meet up when I was away on flights, and subtle innuendos that screamed intimacy. I felt bile rise in my throat as I read the words, "I miss you, and can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened with each line I absorbed. As I dug deeper into her messages, I stumbled upon photos, pictures of her at bars with Trevor, laughing and carefree, their closeness evident in every shot. They looked like a couple, and the reality of what that meant crashed over me like a tidal wave. I was nothing but a fool, oblivious to the deception unfolding around me. I clicked on the timestamps of their exchanges, and my heart sank further when I realized that many of their conversations had occurred during the times I was away on flights. The betrayal felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, each new revelation tightening its grip. I fought back tears, my mind racing as I tried to reconcile this new reality with the life I thought we had. As the hours crept by, I knew I couldn't keep this information to myself. I needed to confront Sophie again, but this time, I wouldn't go in empty-handed. I needed to show her that I wasn't just going to let her lie to me anymore. I decided to dig deeper. I remembered Sophie mentioning her plans to meet friends at a popular cafe on weekends. I could casually drop by and see if Trevor was there, to confirm my worst fears. The thought of confronting them both, of watching the reality unfold before my eyes, made my heart race with a mixture of dread and anticipation. I spent the next few days in a fog of suspicion and anxiety. I meticulously planned my outing, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy around Sophie. I couldn't let her know that I was onto her. Every time I looked at her, I felt the urge to confront her directly. But I knew I needed solid evidence first. Finally, the weekend arrived. I told Sophie I had plans with some colleagues for drinks, giving her no reason to suspect my true intentions. The moment I walked into that cafe, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The vibrant atmosphere was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of coffee cups, but all I could focus on was my mission. I took a seat at a corner table, strategically placed to observe the entrance. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the crowd, anxiety clawing at my throat. I forced myself to breathe slowly, willing the moments to pass as I waited for the familiar face to appear. After what felt like an eternity, there they were, Sophie and Trevor, sitting at a small table near the back. They were laughing, their body language relaxed and intimate. My heart sank further, and I felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, capturing the scene before me like evidence in a courtroom. Every laugh they shared felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I watched as Trevor leaned in closer, brushing his fingers against Sophie's arm, and I felt a surge of rage ignite within me. It was a betrayal that felt unforgivable. I wanted to storm over, to confront them both, but I knew I needed to remain composed. I had to gather more evidence before I made my move. After a while, they stood to leave, Sophie's laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. I followed them outside, careful to stay out of sight. They walked hand in hand, a sight that made my blood boil. My mind raced with thoughts of revenge, fueled by the hurt and anger bubbling inside me. As they turned the corner, I quickly took note of their direction, my heart pounding in sync with my mounting rage. I realized I was standing at a crossroads in my life. A decision awaited me. I could let this betrayal define me, or I could take control of the situation. I knew I was capable of orchestrating my brand of justice. I made my way back home, the weight of what I had witnessed hanging over me like a storm cloud. But I wasn't broken. Instead, I felt a fire igniting within me, a determination to take action. I would uncover every secret, expose every lie, and ensure that Sophie and Trevor would face the consequences of their betrayal. With each step I took, I felt more resolved. The pieces of my plan began to fall into place, and I knew I would not rest until I had turned their world upside down. This was just the beginning of my investigation, and I was ready to unleash my fury. The days that followed my discovery were a blur of confusion and anger. Each morning, I would wake up to the same familiar sights, the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, the gentle hum of the city waking up outside. But all of it felt tainted now, a cruel reminder of the life I had built with Sophie, a life now riddled with betrayal. I couldn't escape the feelings swirling inside me, anger, sadness, and a deep sense of loss. Every time I looked at her, I felt a tempest brewing within me. I watched her go about her daily routine, seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside me. She laughed at the smallest things, shared stories about her day, and even made dinner as if everything was perfectly normal. It was maddening. I couldn't understand how she could be so carefree when I felt like my world was crumbling. The betrayal stung more than I had anticipated. It was not just about the act itself, but also about the trust I had placed in her. My heart raced with thoughts of revenge, but there was a part of me that fought against that desire. Was I the man who would orchestrate revenge? Would that make me any better than her? The internal battle raged on, and I knew I needed to talk to someone about it. That evening, I met up with my best friend, Jake, at our usual bar. The place was dimly lit, the atmosphere heavy with the scent of whiskey and beer. We settled into our favorite booth, and I took a deep breath before spilling my heart out to him. "Jake, I don't know what to do," I began, my voice shaky. "I found out that Sophie's been seeing Trevor. They've been meeting up behind my back, and it feels like I'm living a nightmare." Jake listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to surprise. "Wow, man, I'm sorry to hear that. Have you talked to her about it?" I shook my head, feeling a swell of frustration. "What's the point? She lied to me. I can't trust her anymore. Part of me wants to confront her, to make her feel the pain she's caused me. But another part of me, I don't know. It feels wrong." "You're right to feel conflicted," Jake said, leaning back in his seat. "It's easy to get caught up in anger and want revenge. But think about it, is that going to make you feel better? Or is it just going to drag you down to her level?" His words resonated with me. I took a long sip of my drink, contemplating the advice. Revenge might feel satisfying at the moment, but would it heal the wounds in my heart? I didn't want to become someone I wasn't. Someone fueled by bitterness. "I don't know, man," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "I just feel so betrayed. It's like I'm losing everything I thought I knew. I don't want to let her get away with it. You have to think about your well-being, Kevin. Don't rush into anything. Take your time to gather your thoughts. You deserve better than this," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "You'll find a way to deal with it that's right for you." His words lingered in my mind as I drove home that night. I was grateful for Jake's perspective, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. I needed to channel it somewhere, to take control of a situation that felt utterly beyond my grasp. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a plan began to form in my mind, one that would allow me to take action without losing myself in the process. I couldn't just let Trevor walk away unscathed, and I knew how to hit him where it hurt most, his career. The next morning, I began to devise a strategy. I recalled everything I had learned about Trevor during my online investigation. He worked as a project manager at a local firm, and from what I knew, he was ambitious and driven. But ambition often came with its own set of pitfalls. I would exploit those weaknesses. I began to brainstorm how I could gather evidence of his work-related misconduct. The key would be to document any moments of irresponsibility or unprofessionalism. I started by reaching out to former colleagues of his, discreetly asking questions about his work ethic and any past incidents that might have put him on shaky ground. Most people were more than willing to share their thoughts, and as the days went by, I built a clearer picture of his workplace behavior. One of the things I discovered was that Trevor had a reputation for being late to meetings and missing deadlines. His coworkers shared stories of him slacking off, often choosing to socialize rather than focus on his work. It was the perfect starting point for my plan. Next, I thought about how I could catch him in the act. I had access to a few connections within his firm, and I could use that to my advantage. I reached out to a friend who worked in HR at Trevor's company and casually asked about their policies regarding attendance and deadlines. It was a delicate dance, but I needed to ensure I had solid evidence before making any moves. As I gathered information, I also considered how I could document his behavior without raising suspicion. Perhaps I could follow him during my time off, watch him interact with coworkers, and note any unprofessional conduct. The thought of lurking in the shadows made me uneasy, but I knew that to execute my plan, I needed to be thorough. Every piece of evidence I collected made me feel more empowered. I was no longer the victim, I was the one in control. I envisioned Trevor's face when he realized that his careless behavior had come back to haunt him. The thought of it sent a rush of adrenaline through me, and I found myself smiling despite the circumstances. By the end of the week, I had a solid outline of my plan. I would document Trevor's infractions, gather witness statements from his coworkers, and compile everything into a report. Then, I would anonymously submit it to his boss, ensuring that Trevor faced the consequences of his actions. The thrill of the plan brought clarity amidst the chaos of my emotions. I was determined to see it through, to expose the truth, and to show both Sophie and Trevor that actions have consequences. With each passing day, I felt the heaviness in my heart begin to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. As I looked in the mirror that morning, I no longer recognized the man I had been just a few weeks prior. I was no longer just Kevin, the devoted husband. I was Kevin, the man on a mission, a man ready to reclaim his life and confront the betrayals that had rocked his world. The following weeks passed in a blur of clandestine operations and meticulous planning. Every moment was consumed with thoughts of Trevor and the elaborate scheme I was crafting. The adrenaline rush I felt from my plan brought a sense of purpose, allowing me to channel my emotions into something productive. The anger and betrayal that had once weighed heavily on my heart transformed into determination as I began to execute my plan to gather evidence against him. Each day, I would take a different route to work, ensuring I wouldn't be noticed. I chose spots that provided good vantage points of Trevor's office building, my heart racing each time I parked the car and settled into wait. The thrill of the chase ignited a new energy within me. I was not just a victim anymore. I was becoming the orchestrator of my justice. My first few days of surveillance yielded little. I watched as employees filed into the building, each person moving with purpose, while Trevor, it seemed, was always just out of reach. It wasn't until a Thursday afternoon that I finally caught a break. I saw him striding toward the entrance, his usual swagger in place. I quickly pulled out my phone, snapping photos as he approached. To my satisfaction, I noticed that he arrived 10 minutes late for a team meeting, strutting in as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I took several photos of him entering the conference room, his face alight with confidence, completely unaware that he was being watched. Over the next few days, I intensified my efforts. I began to note the times he arrived late, the days he skipped work entirely, and the conversations I overheard while hanging around nearby cafes where his coworkers frequented during lunch breaks. The more I listened, the more I learned. I jotted down everything: names of witnesses, times and dates of his infractions, and snippets of conversations that hinted at his lack of commitment to his job. On one particularly revealing afternoon, I overheard a group of Trevor's coworkers discussing their frustrations with him. "He's always the last one to show up and the first one to leave," one of them complained. "I don't get how he keeps his job. It's like he thinks he can do whatever he wants." I felt a surge of triumph as I continued to document everything. The tension in my chest eased slightly with each piece of evidence I collected. I was piecing together a narrative that would expose Trevor as the lazy and irresponsible employee he truly was. By the time 2 weeks had passed, I had amassed a small collection of photos and notes detailing Trevor's behavior. I had caught him sneaking out of the office early on multiple occasions, taking extended lunch breaks, and even spending time at a bar during work hours. It was all too perfect, the perfect storm that would unravel his carefully crafted facade. But I knew I needed to be strategic about how I would use this information. I didn't want to simply hand over my findings. I wanted to ensure that the right people would see it and that Trevor would face the repercussions he deserved. As luck would have it, I had maintained a professional connection with an old friend from college who worked in human resources at a prominent firm downtown. Her name was Lisa, and she had always been sharp and perceptive. I decided to reach out, explaining that I needed to discuss something important and confidential. We met for coffee at a quaint cafe, away from prying eyes. As we sat down, I could see the curiosity in her eyes, and it felt good to have someone on my side. After some small talk, I broached the topic. "Lisa, I need your help with something." Sensitive, I began, my voice low. "It's about Trevor and his work ethic. I think he's been slipping up, and I have reason to believe that it's affecting his team and the company." She leaned in, intrigued. "What do you mean? Is he doing something illegal?" "Not illegal, but unprofessional," I replied, my heart pounding as I shared the details. I recounted my findings, emphasizing the negative impact of Trevor's behavior on his colleagues and the overall morale of the team. Lisa listened intently, her brow furrowing as I presented the evidence I had gathered. I showed her the photos on my phone, detailing the times he had been late or absent without justification. "This is significant," she said, her expression turning serious. "If what you're saying is true, it could warrant a discussion with his superiors. I can't promise anything, but I'll make sure it gets to the right people." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. I just want to make sure that this doesn't go unnoticed." "Leave it to me," she assured me, and I felt a surge of hope as we wrapped up our conversation. I knew that I had done everything I could to ensure Trevor faced the consequences of his actions. Over the next few days, I anxiously awaited news from Lisa. My mind racing with thoughts of how Trevor would react when the truth came to light. I could picture his face when the evidence was presented to his boss, and it filled me with a sense of satisfaction. I was finally taking control of the narrative, and the thought was intoxicating. As the sun set on another long day, I felt a sense of peace settle in. I had faced the demons of betrayal and found a way to fight back. Whatever happened next, I knew that I had fought for my dignity and would not let Trevor continue to walk all over me. With each passing day, I felt stronger, more resolute, and ready to see my plan unfold. The day I had been waiting for arrived with an electric tension hanging in the air. I paced the floor of my living room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second amplifying the anticipation that thrummed in my chest. I had been informed by Lisa that Trevor was due to meet with his supervisor that afternoon, and I could hardly contain my excitement. I busied myself with mundane tasks, but my mind was elsewhere, focused on the prospect of watching Trevor's world unravel. I couldn't help but imagine the look on his face when he confronted the evidence of his incompetence. It felt like a well-deserved moment of justice, a long overdue reckoning for the pain he had caused me. Later that day, I received a text from Lisa. "Just wanted to let you know that Trevor had a serious talk with his boss today. He was reprimanded for his recent behavior. He looked pretty shaken up." A rush of satisfaction flooded through me. I felt a grin tug at the corners of my mouth, but even as I celebrated this small victory, a sense of unease washed over me. Despite the exhilaration of seeing my plan come to fruition, the emotional turmoil I had experienced over the past weeks lingered in the background like a persistent storm cloud. I couldn't shake the bitter taste of betrayal that still lingered in my mouth, nor could I ignore the reality that, while I had succeeded in undermining Trevor, I still had a long road ahead in processing the hurt Sophie had inflicted upon me. My heart twisted at the thought of it, but I pushed the feelings aside, focusing instead on my plan to exploit the fallout of Trevor's reprimand. The following morning, I watched Sophie as she went about her routine. She seemed unusually distracted, her eyes darting to her phone as if she were waiting for a message. I knew she was probably worried about Trevor. And that realization ignited a spark of opportunity in my mind. I decided to approach her casually. "Hey, did you hear anything from Trevor lately?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Her gaze shot up, surprise etched on her face. "No, why? What do you mean?" I feigned ignorance, leaning back slightly in my chair. "I just heard some rumors about him getting into trouble at work." Seems like things aren't going so well for him. The moment I mentioned trouble, I could see her demeanor shift. Her brows knitted together, and a hint of concern creased her forehead. What kind of trouble? She pressed, her voice tinged with a mixture of curiosity and worry. Just some stuff about being late and missing deadlines, I replied, forcing a casual tone. I think he might have gotten a warning from his boss or something. You know how cutthroat these workplaces can be. Sophie's expression hardened as she absorbed my words. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the gears of doubt beginning to churn. The guilt that I had hoped to provoke began to bubble beneath the surface, and I felt a swell of satisfaction at her growing unease. He's been so focused on his career, she said, almost to herself. I didn't think he'd let things slip like that. He always seemed so driven. People change, Sophie. You never know what someone is going through, I replied, planting seeds of doubt. Maybe he's been distracted. He's not the person you thought he was. I watched as the realization hit her. She began to question the very foundation of her relationship with Trevor, and it filled me with a sense of empowerment. This was what I had wanted, to make her see that the man she had chosen was unworthy of her trust. As the days passed, I leaned into the role of the supportive husband, all the while nurturing the uncertainty I had sown. Sophie began to open up more, sharing her concerns about Trevor and expressing her confusion over his recent behavior. I listened intently, subtly steering the conversation toward the idea that Trevor might not be the man she believed he was. I mean, if he cares about you, he wouldn't be letting his work suffer, right? I posed, watching her face closely for any signs of guilt or remorse. Yeah, you're right, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It just makes me feel uneasy. I can't help but wonder if he's been honest with me. There it was, the doubt I had hoped to instill. I leaned back in my chair, a sense of triumph swelling within me. I was shaping the narrative, planting the seeds of guilt and uncertainty. And she was beginning to see Trevor for the man he truly was. Each time she brought up Trevor, I made sure to amplify her concerns, subtly reinforcing the idea that he was letting her down. It was a delicate dance, but I was enjoying the performance. As her suspicions grew, so did my confidence. Sophie began to withdraw, her mind occupied with questions about Trevor's integrity and commitment. I could see the toll it took on her, the carefree joy that once defined her was being replaced with worry and doubt. In a way, it felt like justice for the way she had betrayed me. One evening, as we sat in silence, Sophie finally broke. Kevin, do you think I should talk to Trevor about all this? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I sensed the moment was ripe for planting the final seed. Maybe you should. If you care about him, you deserve to know the truth, I suggested. But just remember, sometimes people show their true colors when they're under pressure. Her gaze dropped, and I could see the weight of my words settle heavily on her shoulders. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and conflict. I had succeeded in creating doubt in her heart, but I also recognized the pain in her eyes, the pain of someone who was starting to see the cracks in her world. The line between revenge and compassion blurred at that moment, and I found myself grappling with a deep sense of unease. Yes, I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, but I also didn't want to see her broken. But as the days turned into weeks, I pushed those conflicting emotions aside. I had set the wheels in motion, and I was determined to see it through. Trevor was facing the consequences of his actions, and in that sense, I had reclaimed my power. I just hoped that in the end, I wouldn't lose myself along the way. The day had come when I finally saw my plan reach its devastating conclusion. Trevor, the man who had been the source of my anguish and betrayal, had decided to leave town. I had watched it all unfold from a distance, my heart thrumming with a mix of satisfaction and something darker. It was a Friday afternoon when the news broke. I had been home, pretending to focus on my work while keeping an ear out for Sophie as she returned from her outing with friends. I could sense that she had been trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the tension between us had been palpable. As she stepped through the door, her expression was heavy with concern. Kevin, I just got off the phone with Trevor, she said, her voice strained. He's moving away. He says he can't find a job here anymore. My stomach twisted in a knot, a mix of triumph and unexpected remorse washing over me. I leaned against the kitchen counter, adopting a concerned look. What do you mean? Is he okay? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. He said he's tired of struggling. He feels like he's lost everything, the job, the respect. He said he's going to move back to his hometown, where he can start fresh. Inside, I felt a surge of victory. This was the outcome I had envisioned, a clean break that would free me from the weight of Trevor's presence in our lives. But as I watched Sophie crumble at the news, I realized the price of that victory was far higher than I had anticipated. He just gave up? She whispered, her voice cracking. I thought he would fight for this job, for us. I studied her face, noting the hurt that flickered in her eyes, and it felt like a dagger to my heart. I had wanted to break Trevor, to see him suffer, but watching Sophie in pain felt like a betrayal of my own. Maybe it's for the best, I suggested, though my tone lacked conviction. If he wasn't committed, why stay? Sophie seemed to absorb my words, but I could tell they did little to ease her heartache. She slumped onto the couch, her shoulders shaking as she tried to process the reality of the situation. I thought things would get better between us, she murmured, wiping away a tear. I just don't understand what went wrong. I stayed silent, torn between my emotions and the facade I had built. I had orchestrated this downfall, but the aftermath was far from the satisfaction I had craved. I couldn't help but feel that I was losing something too. The woman I had once loved, the life we had built together, and the sense of happiness that seemed so far out of reach. As the evening wore on, I listened as Sophie dialed Trevor's number, her voice trembling as she begged him to reconsider. I could hear the desperation in her tone, and it echoed the pain I felt deep inside. She was fighting for something that was slipping away, and I felt like an intruder in the midst of it all. Trevor, please don't go, she pleaded, her words heavy with emotion. We can work this out. I can help you find a new job. We can figure this out together. I watched her, my heart aching for both of us. Trevor's response was a gentle but firm rejection. Sophie, I can't do this anymore. I need to take a step back. Maybe this is for the best. Her voice wavered as she tried to make sense of his decision. What about us? What about everything we had? I could see Trevor's silence on the other end of the line. And in that moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I won? As Sophie's eyes filled with tears, I understood that the victory I had sought had come at a cost I was not prepared to pay. After she hung up, Sophie sank into the couch, her entire demeanor deflated. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I felt like a ghost in my own home. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of my actions settling heavily on my shoulders. Trevor was leaving, and with him, a piece of Sophie's heart. The woman who had once been so vibrant and full of life was fading before my eyes. And I felt powerless to stop it. As days turned into weeks, Trevor's departure settled into the fabric of our lives. Sophie was a shadow of her former self, often lost in thought, staring out the window as if searching for something that was no longer there. I tried to be supportive, but I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of my role in this tragic unfolding, and it left me feeling hollow. I busied myself with work, but the satisfaction of my revenge was fleeting. I had achieved what I set out to do. Trevor was gone, and Sophie was left to grapple with the loss. But instead of relief, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Each day, I confronted the reality that I had not only destroyed Trevor's career but had also fractured my marriage in the process. Sophie began to pull away from me as well, her grief isolating her in a way that I couldn't bridge. I would sit across the dinner table, watching her push her food around, her mind miles away. "Are you okay?" I would ask, hoping to spark some connection, but my questions fell flat. "It's just hard to process everything," she'd reply, her voice distant, as if I were a stranger. I never thought Trevor would give up so easily. I feel like I didn't know him at all. I wanted to scream, to reveal the truth that I had hidden behind my facade, but I bit my tongue, knowing that it would only lead to further pain. I was trapped in a web of my own making, and I couldn't find a way out. As the weeks passed, I watched as Sophie gradually transformed into a shell of the woman I once knew. Her laughter was replaced with silence, her spark extinguished by the weight of heartbreak. I felt the slow erosion of our relationship, the growing distance between us a reminder of the choices I had made. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I finally broke down. "Sophie, I'm here for you. If you want to talk about Trevor or anything else, I want to help you through this." She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him, or even myself," she whispered. And that's when it hit me like a tidal wave. My quest for vengeance had led to this moment of devastation. In my attempt to reclaim my dignity, I had obliterated everything we had built together. I had wanted to hurt Trevor, but in doing so, I had inflicted wounds on my own heart, and Sophie's as well. I felt like a fraud, a man who had fought to protect his pride but had sacrificed the very essence of his life in the process. I realized that my vengeance had not brought me happiness, it had left me feeling more alone than ever. As the shadows lengthened in our home, I sat there, aware of the silent ruin around us. I had torn apart not only Trevor's world but my own family, and now I was left to confront the emptiness that came with it. The echoes of my actions reverberated in my mind, a constant reminder of the man I had become. The journey of revenge had promised satisfaction, yet all I was left with was sorrow and regret. I had succeeded in my mission, but at what cost? As I glanced at Sophie, lost in her thoughts, I realized that the victory I had sought was a hollow one. I had not only broken Trevor but had broken us both. And in that moment of clarity, I understood the true weight of my choices, a weight that would follow me long after the dust had settled.